We are in a park with two children building a sandcastle. The boy watches their work, saying he thinks it's not right. He says that's not what he wanted, and the girl ends up laughing at him. At that moment, an older boy appears and steps on the two children's sandcastle while taunting them. After stepping on the castle, he tells the two to go somewhere else, making the girl cry over the destroyed work. Then the boy who was with her stands up to respond to the bully. Our protagonist tells him to get off the sandcastle, but this makes the bully angry, and he asks what he was saying. The boy shows his irritation, telling him to take his foot off his castle. Seeing the protagonist's face, the bully shrinks a bit while trying to look serious. At that moment, a foot appears in front of him. Almost like a shadow, in an acrobatic move, the protagonist manages to land a kick on the bully's face. With that blow, the bully is knocked down hard, while the protagonist remains ready for a possible attack. The bully slowly gets up while cleaning his nose. Then he notices he's bleeding and gets even angrier with the boy. But instead of retaliating, he starts to cry, asking for help. This leaves the protagonist without reaction, while his friend hides behind him for protection. A few minutes later, the bully returns with a bandage on his nose and his older brother, asking if it was the boy who hit him. Our protagonist just stares at the older brother seriously, which annoys him. For not getting an answer, the older brother tries to convince the boy to talk, but he just dodges. This irritates him even more, and the protagonist mentions he never learned martial arts. While the older brother insists on trying to touch the protagonist, he just dodges everything. When the protagonist notices a gap, he lands a kick between the older brother's legs, which scares the younger one. At that moment, the younger bully complains to the protagonist about what he did to his brother. Our protagonist mentions that even without knowing martial arts, he's always been a troublemaker, although he didn't care about those childhood fights, remembering it only became a problem when he grew up. A few years later, the protagonist was attending 5th grade at Moon Elementary School. While going to school, he ends up being called by a group of high schoolers to an alley. The high school boy asks him to do them a favor while showing a very suspicious look. Then he puts his arm over the protagonist's shoulder, saying he too was once a student at Moon Elementary. So the high schooler starts pushing the protagonist into the alley where his friends were. One of his friends mocks that high schooler Austin, saying he had a talent for it, while the girl in the group tells him to hurry up. The high schooler looks at him with an even more suspicious look, asking if he would help them. Our protagonist turns to him and asks what they want. This question starts to irritate the high schooler, who tells him to hand over all the money. Then the protagonist says that the high school students were so poor, they needed to go get it from children. At this, the group starts to laugh at Austin for being provoked by the boy, and saying that the protagonist was angry. Austin loses his patience and tries to deal with the boy alone, but the protagonist shows he knows how to deal with people like him. After dodging a few times, the group starts to take an interest in it, with the girl saying she was rooting for the protagonist. Seeing that this could attract a lot of attention, the other boys decide to help Austin deal with him. At that moment, the protagonist lands a knee on Austin's chin. With Austin knocked down, the protagonist faces the rest of the group, waiting to see their response. A second boy approaches, hitting him with a punch in the face, making him be dragged across the ground with the impact. A second high schooler shows irritation with the protagonist and decides to teach him a lesson. But the protagonist says he never felt fear or thought about what would happen after. As he picks up a brick from the ground, he says he knew exactly how to react, and then he uses the brick and hits the high schooler hard on the head. With two knocked down, the other members of the group are speechless while staring at the protagonist. Their leader, Austin, whom they believe would be the school leader, was knocked out with his head bleeding. This causes the others to lose their heads and go after the protagonist for revenge, but he advances against them with the brick, saying he believes he was born this way and that he never loses in a fight. The girl in the group is in shock, while someone trembles beside her, begging for help. Seeing everyone being knocked down by the protagonist, his brick in hand was completely stained with blood from his attacks. When the protagonist turns to the girl to find out what she intended to do, he looks at her in a frightening way. A few minutes later at the police station, the officer asks if he was really serious that he had done all this, but the boy just remains quiet, leaving the officer waiting for some answer. At that moment, a woman arrives in the room with a coat and panting, while calling for her son, Seth. She apologizes to the officer, while he just says it was all right, still awkward about the situation. After that, the two leave the police station without saying anything. With the woman watching her son, she asks if he was hurt, and he shakes his head no. Then she bends down to talk to Seth, asking him to promise one thing, which confuses him. His mother asks him to promise that he would no longer fight with anyone. Seth nods, agreeing, saying he had no other choice because he didn't want to see that sadness in her eyes anymore. She thanks Seth for the promise, but he remembers that at the time, he didn't know the truth behind that sadness. Time passes and Seth arrives at high school, still having the same determined expression from that time. A boy opens the door with all his might while calling for Seth, clearly looking for a fight. Then he invades the room and lands a kick on Seth's back, while asking if Seth thinks he's funny. With that kick, he ends up being thrown against the wall. The boy tells Seth to just obey him, and if he needs money to give to him, to ask someone else. Seth gets angry and thinks about retaliating, but he hesitates and simply apologizes. But then the boy throws his head to the ground and tells him not to do that again. He even says that he should be careful, especially near him, if he doesn't want to have problems. After the boy gives that warning, he leaves the room, while surrounded by his friends who watch Seth, laughing at him. Our protagonist clenches his fist while trembling with anger, until he takes a deep breath and just says he did well in not reacting. Upon arriving home, his mother observes him and notices something. She works at a restaurant, asking him how school was, and he just says it was great. He asks how the restaurant is doing, and she says it's going very well. Seth says all he wished for was to see the smile on his mother's face, no matter what happened. But at that moment, a black car appears on the street in front of the restaurant. As they go out to check what was happening, they notice there were several cars, and some men got out of them. These men appear with a funeral photo, saying that man had passed away, which shocks his mother. Seth is startled, seeing his mother collapsing, and asks what was happening. He looks back at the photo and remembers that on that day, something had happened to them. Years pass, and we see Youngjin High School, where there were rumors of a new student, and the others were curious about it. As the student approached the classroom, the teacher mentions the transfer student and asks for help with him. At that moment, the student arrives in the classroom, introduces himself as Seth Kang. The girls stare at him, noticing he was quite handsome, while one of them seemed to recognize that name. But with the continuous murmurs, the teacher gets irritated and tells everyone to be quiet. The boys at the back of the room already observe him with malicious laughter, until one of the boys ends up noticing something, and his friend asks what happened. This boy recognizes Seth too and believes it was a big coincidence. Seth introduces himself to the class, and the teacher tells him to sit on the empty bench at the back. Then he approaches his desk and sits next to the spiky-haired boy who is sleeping. As he looks to the side, he notices the boy staring at him with the same malicious smile as before. He decides to give a friendly smile as he recognizes the boys, noting that they also went to that high school. During the break, one of the boys approaches Seth and mentions they were sad when transferred. In high school, the boys start to surround him, saying they are going to have a great school year. But Seth gives a smile that irritates the boy and asks if he doesn't remember who he was. Our protagonist says he couldn't possibly forget who he was, while showing an empty and dead smile. That face scares the boy, and his friend gets angry with Seth, asking if he was crazy. At that moment, the sleeping boy simply tells everyone to be quiet. He lifts his face a bit, asking if they didn't see that he wants to sleep, while showing a stressed look. This scares the boy even more, who just apologizes to him. After avoiding a fight with the sleepy boy, the bully stands up, saying he hasn't finished the conversation with the protagonist. Seth turns to his sleeping classmate, not understanding. The teacher opens the door, trembling, as he was a very old man, and moves slowly to the desk. He tries to start the class until he gets confused and forgets what the planned lesson was for that day. Meanwhile, the boy continues to be outraged, thinking about Seth managing to leave him without an answer and already plans to take revenge on him. When he turns to Seth, he is staring at the window next to his sleepy classmate. Seth observes the weather of that day with a slight smile, while in the distance, one of the girls was watching him. The girl believes this is the same boy she met when she was younger, but the moment he looks at her, she gets startled and turns away. He gets confused, wondering if she also knew him, but soon he ignores it and goes back to staring at the window, thinking it might be fun. After a while, he feels so relaxed that he starts to get sleepy. At the moment the spiky-haired boy is awake, Seth collapses from sleep under the table. The blonde boy stares at the protagonist and decides to leave the room for a moment. Then the bullies who are watching with fear are impressed, until they understand it would be a chance to go talk to Seth, who was sleeping. With it, the bully joins his friends and goes to the table to settle the score with him. But at that moment, someone comes to stop them. The girl who had recognized him stands in front of the boys to prevent them from approaching Seth. This irritates the bully, saying it's going to be her turn too. But the girl says they can't cause trouble in the classroom. He says he doesn't care about that and tells her to get out of the way, but she doesn't hesitate, saying that as the class representative, she wouldn't let them do whatever they want. At that moment, Seth's hand appears on her shoulder, saying that although he appreciates the help, he prefers that she step aside. Our protagonist refers to them as his high school friends. He asks if they missed him, because he missed those classmates, while showing excitement for a fight. While the representative watches him curiously, the protagonist begins to explain about his life, saying that he held back when he was younger because of his mother. And with that, the bully already notices something different, but he also remembers his father's words, saying he shouldn't let anyone kick his behind. A few minutes later, the blonde boy returns to the classroom and notices something different there. He realizes the bullies were no longer there and goes back to sit, while Seth seemed to have gone back to sleep. The class representative tries to look at Seth without turning her face, while the blonde boy lowers his head and goes back to sleep too. Then she turns to the protagonist, who slept like a fool. Meanwhile, a boy asks the bullies about them losing to a transfer student. This boy is intimidating and stares at them with superiority while trying to confirm their story. Asking for help, the bully had a bandage on his nose while saying he used to be weak in high school, but something changed in him. And with that, he remembers how Seth knocked them all down with a single blow. The big guy complains to the bully, Nathan, saying he should be ashamed of losing to a weakling. Then the big guy heads to their classroom and looks through the window, asking if a transfer student was there. With that, he opens the door with everything, already starting a speech for the classroom, wanting to know who the new student is. The representative gets startled to see who it was this time, and he already starts trying to guess who it would be. Nathan mentions it was the boy next to Victor, while the protagonist continues to sleep. Then he says he will give his welcome to the newcomer. As he approaches, the classmate of the representative wonders why he was there. Despite the big guy trying to talk Seth, he doesn't respond, which irritates him even more. Seth lifts his head, still sleepy, and the big guy says he took care of his money source. The big guy introduces himself as Goblin from Yongsan High School and says you must have heard something about him. At that moment, Goblin starts to look closely at Seth's face, realizing it was familiar, and wonders if they've seen each other before. Our protagonist asks what he's talking about, and then the two recognize each other. It turns out that Goblin from Yongsan was the bully who destroyed his sandcastle when he was a child. Remembering this, Seth gets excited, asking how he's been and how his brother was, but he doesn't realize how much Goblin was sweating cold. Remembering his face, trying to stay firm, he just says he'll see him later. Seth smiles, saying, "It's all good." As Goblin leaves the room, being questioned by Nathan, the bully tries to force Goblin to solve his problem with Seth until he sees the big guy's face again, telling him to move. Nathan doesn't understand anything and asks if he wasn't going to solve the case, but Goblin reinforces that he should get out of the way. With that, Goblin walks out of the room, and Nathan just looks confused and turns to face Seth, not understanding anything. Seth feels at home returning to his old neighborhood until they realize something. Both he and the representative have a slight premonition, while Goblin makes a call to his older brother.